The year of 2024 has finally ended, and there has been so many stinkers that have been shoved down our throat this year. But I wanted to start the year off with a more positive note. Even though there were many disappointments, there are still some directors out there that still appreciate cinema over money. I've put together a list of my top 5 best sci-fi fantasy movies that have come out in 2024. And perhaps you might agree. Let me know in the comments if you would change my list. And how would you do it? Like and subscribe for more videos. Coming in at number 5 for me is Deadpool and Wolverine. This was perhaps the most anticipated movie. People were talking about Deadpool and Wolverine for months before it even released. That happened for a couple reasons. One is, well, because it's Deadpool and Wolverine in the same movie. Who wouldn't want to see two of the best comic book adaptations fight each other? The most important reason is because they had some of the best marketing I've ever seen for a movie. Given all the hype though, it might have given me too high of expectations that the film just could not reach for me. If you're just looking for a good laugh and great action, then this movie's good for you. But I didn't feel like Deadpool's motivations were as powerful as his motivations in the second movie. In Deadpool 2, he's motivated by the loss of his girlfriend. In Deadpool and Wolverine, he's mainly motivated by his loss of usefulness. He's just kind of depressed and lonely because he feels like he needs to be a part of something. The plot concerning Cassandra Nova also didn't feel very satisfying either. Cassandra Nova is a powerful being, and it kind of sucks that she died so easily. With that being said, it's still a pretty hilarious and action-packed film. Number 4 would be Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. What I love most about this movie is the absolutely stunning visuals it gives you, as well as how they portrayed the humans versus the apes. The humans that are waltzing about in the wild can no longer speak, and are being herded and manipulated like sheep. One thing this movie succeeds at is that you actually feel like this is what the world would be like if apes really did rule the earth. It feels more realistic in the sense that I can see this being the case in an alternate timeline. Some of the other apes movies didn't really achieve that. I put this movie at number 4 because it's set years after Caesar died, with new characters and a new world entirely. There are many people, including myself, that wish this movie could have been more about Caesar's son and the struggles he had to go through when he took his father's place. I also didn't feel very invested in the main character at all, and nothing Noah or May did was very compelling. The only character I actually felt for died halfway through the film, and he only had like 20 minutes of screen time. Right in the middle of the stack, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, comes in at number 3. You know, I've never seen Mad Max, but even without knowing the full extent of the story, I was still very immersed in her story and how she was able to finally get her revenge. It is quite refreshing. What this movie does very well at is giving us characters that are very inventive and psychotic in their own way. The relationship between Dementus and Furiosa is a very interesting component, and adds a very compelling character development throughout the film where Dementus becomes his own downfall by giving Furiosa the tools and motivations she needs to defeat him. There are also components that I felt needed to be worked on a bit more, or just felt a little unnecessary. There are some explosions and battle scenes that have painfully obvious CGI. And then it looks like it was stitched together for a school project that you procrastinated, and so you had to hand it in half finished. They didn't use as many practical effects as the original film did. Maybe they did that just to save time, but it's not going to age as well as the first movie. The last complaint I have of Furiosa is that there's too many endings. There was like 4 separate times when I felt like the end credits were going to roll, and it turns out that there's still like 20 minutes left in the movie. In second place, I have Alien Romulus. I was tossing and turning all night whether or not to put this at first place, because I really enjoyed this movie. One of the best things that I love about this movie is that everything that happens causes another problem to occur. And most movies do have a cause and effect to them, but this one really sticks out to me because it's the little things that matter. Things that might feel very mundane to the audience actually make a very big impact later on. I am also a big fan of the Alien franchise, and I really appreciate that they brought this film back to the same style of the first Alien movie. They even went back to using practical effects for the xenomorphs, which was a sight for sore eyes, to say the least. One of the main reasons why I didn't give this one the top spot is because not everybody is going to like this movie. I watched it a second time in theaters with my brother and my dad, and they didn't like it that much. It might be disturbing for some people as well because of that absolute abomination at the end. Another complaint is that it can sometimes be too predictable. That's pretty common with movies in this genre, but people are starting to get sick of the same kind of cliches in every movie. Before we take a dive into the number 1 sci-fi fantasy movie this year, let's look at a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make it into my top 5. First, there is Smile 2. I really enjoyed this movie, and it took me about a week to fully recover because I was absolutely terrified. The idea of having a pop star as the main character is genius, because she is constantly being watched. She's constantly surrounded by people, so you never know when the Smile entity is going to infect someone else. The reason I didn't put it in my top 5 is because this movie is way too similar to the first movie. I was expecting the film to explore more about what the entity actually is than going through the same process that we saw before. Now, we can't go talking about the best of 2024 without talking about Wicked. I was really surprised by how good this was, and how accurate it was to the play as well. Most of the songs are pretty powerful, and the movie as a whole gives off a very cheerful attitude. The main reason why I didn't put it in my top 5 is because I'm not a woman. I'm not saying that men can't like this movie, but all the themes, undertones, and characters are meant for a female audience. And there's just a lot of other movies I'd rather watch than this one. This is the type of movie I'd only watch if it's my wife's turn to pick the movie. My last honorable mention before we move on to the #1 sci-fi fantasy film of the year is Nosferatu. I just recently came back from watching this one, and man, it is disturbing to say the least. I believe this to be a really good film, but it also has an acquired taste. This is the type of movie you would watch just for the pure love of cinema, and not necessarily for the story. The way that each shot smoothly transitions into another really sucks your eyeballs into the screen. The acting was some of the best I've ever seen. The actors had to do some pretty demanding things in this movie, and they didn't hold back. My favorite component is the poetic nature of the dialogue. I was just intently pondering every single word spoken because it really was like listening to poetry. The reason this one isn't in my top 5 is because, to be honest, it's a little too artsy for me to really get into the story. With films like this, the pacing always seems a bit choppy in some parts because they're relying too much on the visuals to tell the story. I also thought the ending was a little unsatisfying as well. If you made it this far into the video, I just wanted to say that I appreciate you, and you should hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Now, we finally made it to the #1 sci-fi fantasy movie of the year, and this probably isn't a surprise to anyone, but it's Dune Part 2. This film is pretty artsy too, but does it in a way that makes the narrative a lot more clear. Each character knows what their roles are, and the cinematography is absolutely breathtaking. Denis Villeneuve always has the most beautiful scenes in his movies, and he's one of my favorite directors for that. This movie also explains all of the questions you might have had after the first one. Dune Part 1 is all about world building, which is what made the narrative a little slow, and at times kind of boring. But Dune Part 2 is where everything comes together, and where I was able to get fully immersed into the universe. One complaint that a lot of people had, especially for those who have read the books, is the change that was made for Chani. In the books, Chani fully believes in Paul's vision, and is completely loyal to him. In the movie, she's absolutely skeptical of everything, and doesn't believe him to be the Lisan al-Gaib like everyone else. Here's what Denis Villeneuve said about the change of Chani's character.
When Frank Herbert wrote the book, and then when the book came out, he was disappointed how people perceived Paul Atreides. At the time, he felt that people were talking about Paul as a hero.
Sure.
And for him, he was an anti-hero. He was a dark figure. He was the book was a warning for him about a messianic figure, and for that he wrote Dune Messiah to correct and to make sure that people understood his intention. And I knew that story. I knew I had the benefit of having read Dune Messiah, so I wrote Part 2 having that in mind, and that is why Chani's character is slightly different in my adaptation than in the book, and it helped me to bring the initial intention of Frank Herbert to the screen.
Let me know in the comments if you think he was right to make that change. Well, these are my top 5 sci-fi fantasy movies of this year. Do you agree with my list? If not, swap your thoughts in the comments below of what your top 5 sci-fi fantasy movies are. I've swapped my thoughts, and if you want to see my thoughts on Kraven the Hunter, then click right up here, and I'll see you on the other side.